there's no opportunity that's too small. If somebody expresses an interest in sharing your story, you should probably take them up on it. That whoever is interested in you may go on to a bigger publication and present you with a bigger opportunity. You need to be able to tell your story well. And it's remarkable how many business owners struggle with that. Somebody will pitch me on a story and I won't really be that interested, but they sound like an interesting person, so I'll start having a conversation with them, and within 10 minutes I realize, whoa, wait a second, there are these 12 other things that are really interesting that'll really make for a story. So it's important to figure out what you actually have accomplished, what you know that would be of interest to someone else, and then look for opportunities to share that.
As you know, Unlocking Moves is my way to showcase the key pivotal moments and decision points that really change the trajectory of the lives of entrepreneurs and leaders. And I want to hear stories because I think most people learn from stories. And I want to hear not just your glory stories, I want to hear your gory stories. Because as I like to say, the bigger the shit show, the bigger the lesson. So speaking of stories, my guest today, Loren Feldman, has a zillion of them because he used to write about entrepreneurs on the daily for some of the largest magazines you can name. But Loren, before we get into the show, you probably know how this works by now. I like to hit my guests up with an off-the-wall question or comment to really put them on their toes. You ready for this?
I'm not sure, but I'll take a shot.
Well, first of all, you should know that you should lock down your Facebook and Instagram so people can't see your private information. Second of all, it's not really where I'm going with this. Second of all, I read that for 4 months earlier in your career, you were a coach for the Texas Rangers minor league baseball team in the Dominican Republic. I had no idea. What the hell? Tell me about that.
That was 4 of the best months of my life. My wife and I had been working at magazine jobs in New York, and we had decided we wanted to move to Philadelphia. We were going to quit our jobs, get different jobs, and we decided we wanted to have an adventure. And it just so happened that I had done a story. I had a great assignment from GQ magazine. They sent me to the Dominican Republic to stay at a famous resort called Casa de Campo and to write about both the resort and about this baseball crazy island where so many major leaguers were coming from. What can you see if you go there as a tourist? So I had a great time doing that. And I met somebody there who happened to be a scout for the Texas Rangers who lived in New York City. And we became really close friends. And so we told him one night that we were going to take this adventure. We thought we might travel around Europe or something. And he said, "No, come work for me in San Pedro de Macorís in the Dominican Republic." And we decided to do it. We spent 4 months there. My wife speaks Spanish very well, so she taught English to these like 17 and 18-year-old kids who are going to be sent to cities all over, the southern United States where they'd have to fend for themselves. She taught them how to order a Big Mac or, buy something at Target. And I coached first base and hit ground balls and pitched a little batting practice and had the time of my life. So it was really a wonderful experience.
Well, please tell me you had some baseball coaching experience before that endeavor.
Well, I played in high school, and I don't want to brag, Kurt, but I was this close to being mediocre. Um, and like you probably know this, in a lot of sports, the people who go on to become good coaches aren't always the best players because it comes too naturally to them. So I really wanted to be good. I tried really hard. I learned a lot. And I actually think I was a pretty good coach. I coached a little bit of high school, and I coached at the Little League summer camp in Williamsport, where they have the Little League World Series. And my friend who hired me to go down there knew this and took a little bit of a chance on me. And they didn't give me too much responsibility, but I was able to coach first base.
That's awesome. Hey, you're more humble than I am because if it were me, it would be blasted all over my LinkedIn, Texas Rangers, Major League Baseball Club, and you'd think I was the manager of the World Series team.
Well, I'm not trying to make it in baseball anymore. I did get one offer to be a scout after that, and I often think about, what would have happened if I had taken that job? It was actually with the Detroit Tigers. I got to know a scout who worked for them in the Dominican. But oddly enough, back then scouts made even less money than journalists, so that's part of the reason I didn't do it.
That's awesome. Well, hey, as you guys could tell, my guest today is Loren Feldman. He has a very decorated career, over 20 years covering entrepreneurship at magazines such as Inc. magazine, Forbes magazine, and the New York Times. He also was a muckety muck at Philadelphia magazine and George magazine, but I want to spend most of my time today talking about entrepreneurialism. He has his finger on the pulse, absolutely, of the entrepreneur world in general. And today, which is where we're going to focus most of our time, he is the editor, or sorry, he's the founder of 21 Hats Media. We're going to dive into that at length. Loren, welcome to Unlocking Moves.
I'm honored to be here, Kurt. I've learned a lot from you the last couple of years. Thanks for having me.
Well, I want to start with a quote, and I love this quote that I heard from you somewhere, and that is, behind almost every entrepreneur, there's a really bad former boss, which resonates for me, and I'm sure resonates for our listeners. Tell me a little bit about what that means for you.
Well, as you well know, it's hard to start and build a business, and people don't take that leap lightly. Oftentimes, if they were given room to run, they probably would have stayed in the job that they had. But ultimately, get to the point where they just can't take it anymore, or they're thrown out the door. Um, and they decide to start a business. And I think I ask this question of entrepreneurs all the time, and it almost invariably is true. Now, it's also true that a lot of them were really bad employees because the skills that go into being a good employee and being a good entrepreneur are very different. But there are a lot of people who have these great ideas. They keep trying and they don't get the response they're looking for. So they finally you know, go out and try to do it themselves,
Well,
thankfully.
well, that resonates a lot with me. I know that a lot of entrepreneurs start when they were terminated or fired or some way, and maybe because they were bad employees, like you said. I know I was probably the worst auditor in the history of Ernst and Young, which is how I ended up as an entrepreneur. Well, hey, let's talk about 21 Hats. And I would love for you to start with your elevator pitch. Like, what is 21 Hats? And then I want to weigh in because I know you're going to be overly humble about what 21 Hats is.
uh, 21 Hats is a community of business owners who learn from each other by comparing notes, by sharing those stories, both the glory stories and the gory stories, and um, try to figure out a way to run a business, which is again such a difficult thing to do, and there's so few places where you can go to get that preparation, that knowledge, that experience. So that's what I'm trying to create, a community where people can help each other.
Well, 21 Hats has a weekly podcast where he follows business owners for the last 3.5 or more years now about their journey. So it's really letting you inside the room, so to speak, about what some of these entrepreneurs are dealing with. It's also a daily newsletter that has a boatload of information that's timely, including yesterday's news about the non-competes are no longer allowable. So things like that are very, very timely, and Loren does a great job, and his team do a great job of providing information for entrepreneurs and small business owners. And I'll tell you, business owners feel isolated and lonely, like they're going through this, on their own. And what I've seen from what 21 Hats does is you provide a community for people who they can commiserate with, they can celebrate with, and they can lean on.
Very well said. I'm gonna have to write that down.
Well, one more thing on that is I was at Loren's event about a month and a half ago in Fort Worth, where he got business owners together for about 3 days of all the things I just described. And there were multiple people, I'm going to say about a half dozen out of the 25 or so folks there, that cried because of the impact that Loren Feldman and 21 Hats has had on their lives and their businesses over the last 3+ years. So, Loren, kudos to you. I want to hear more.
It wasn't my goal to make people cry, but it was really humbling when it happened. You were there, you saw. I was asking for their input, um, as I try to figure out a real business model for 21 Hats, I feel as though I've made a lot of progress, but I haven't completely nailed that monetization aspect of building a business. And as you're right, as people were trying to help me, some of them did get emotional talking about what it had meant to them to be able to connect through 21 Hats with other business owners. And obviously, that was extremely moving to me as well.
Well, I know that 21 Hatch was born out of a former career. As I said, for over 20 years, you covered entrepreneurship for those three magazines. I know you've done other stuff too in more than 20 years, but 20 years on the entrepreneur beat for those magazines. As you've told me before, the reason you have continued to do what you do is no one else wants to do it. No one else wanted to cover the small business or entrepreneurship beat. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's really true. It's kind of an odd thing. Uh, I think it works in a couple of ways. One is, when I was at Inc., I was at Forbes, I was at the New York Times doing essentially the same kind of stuff in different ways. They all had different missions. So what I tried to do for each of them was a little bit different, but it was the same basic idea. And I kept trying to make the argument to them that I was attracting readers that they wouldn't get otherwise. This incredibly attractive demographically group of readers, mostly business owners, who, probably wouldn't have picked up the New York Times for any other reason. But once I got them in, there was the chance they were going to explore and find other stuff that they would like. And all I was asking for was just a little bit of support, a little bit more of a team. Let me try to take this from what I'm doing and build a real community. And nobody ever said it was a bad idea, but they always said they had other priorities. And, I was talking to some very smart people, and, a lot of their priorities made sense. I mean, at the New York Times, I was trying to convince them to do this, and their answer was, well, you know what, we're going to invest in a cooking app right now. And that cooking app has done really well. And everybody eats, not everybody owns a business. So I understand that. But at each of those places, I kept making the argument, and I waited 5 or 6 years and kind of figured out, well, they're never going to come back to me. They kept saying they're going to come back to me, but they're not going to come back to me. So I may have to do this myself. And part of it is, you know, nobody goes into journalism and thinks that they're going to make their career on the small business beat. And that's true whether you're at the Wall Street Journal or Inc. or anywhere else. Everybody wants to keep moving up the food chain. And that's a problem because there's no institutional knowledge. People just turn over really quickly, and these publications don't take it as seriously as I think they should. They're sort of aware that small businesses represent, I don't know, 3/4 of the economy, something like that. So they understand that it's important in the aggregate. They couldn't for the life of themselves understand why I would want to make a career paying attention to individual businesses or owners. To them, all they heard was the word small and small business. Why does this matter? And, I think there are a lot of great answers to that, and I would make them, but I never quite convinced them. And I think that's part of the reason they didn't go for the ideas that I was pitching. So eventually I figured out I had to do it myself.
Well, as you said, Main Street represents such a larger swath of America financially and employment wise than Wall Street. And so I think you've hit on something. The question is, how do we continue to build the community that you built? So I want to talk about a little bit of perhaps the impetus for this. I know that one of your beats was at Inc. magazine where you worked with Bo Burlingham and
That's right.
Norm Brodsky. Well, let's start with Small Giants, because you guys built a nice enterprise. You were doing a Small Giants award, if I recall, at Inc. magazine. Was that based off of Bo's book?
It was based off of Bo's book. It was actually, this is one of those odd things. Inc. magazine at the time, the people who were leading it, they weren't really interested in small giants. For the life of me, that's the argument I made there was, you've got one of the pillars of Inc. magazine is the Inc. 500, the Inc. 5000, and that's fast growing companies, and that's great. Small giants is for businesses that want to grow. It's not anti-growth. They definitely want to grow, but not at all costs. And so maybe they don't want to have to travel the country. Maybe they don't want to keep replicating the same business in multiple locations. They want to build great businesses. They want them to grow. They want to enjoy their lives. Bo deserves all the credit for this. Bo found a bunch of these companies. He put them together in a book, and the book really hit a nerve. It was like the Small Giants organization almost sprung up organically. And it was these owners who read the book and said, "Oh my God, I thought I was the only person who thought that way. Here is my tribe," and they wanted to be part of it. So I was a little bit involved. I was Bo's editor. I edited the piece that he did a treatment that was a cover story in Inc. magazine. So I was a little bit involved, but it was really his project, of course.
And that's great stuff. And I know that there are a lot of businesses that don't want to sell out. They don't want a private equity event or liquidity event or go public. They want to be a small giant and make a good living and do good work and have a great team that they, have employees and take care of folks.
And
I'm
maybe have
glad.
the business live on beyond them. They would like it to remain active if they've built a great culture that their employees are getting something out of. If you sell it to private equity, that's not going to last. Maybe there's another way. Maybe you can sell it to your employees or find some other way to do it. That's what Small Giants is about.
And I felt like I met at least a dozen of those types of folks in Fort Worth, people who had yarn businesses that were doing great work and family owned in multiple locations, people who had cabinet businesses and conference room table building businesses, people who had tech businesses, service businesses. It was really fantastic, great group of folks you had in Fort Worth.
I don't know exactly how to explain it. I've done two of those events. And so far, there have been no assholes who've showed up. I'm not sure why that is. They're just all these, terrific people who are fighting the good fight. Some days living the dream, some days not, but really eager to seek guidance and help other people who might be able to use it.
Well, I'm glad you didn't say there was an asshole in Fort Worth that wasn't in Chicago because I didn't make the Chicago event.
Absolutely not.
Hey, quick commercial. When is the next and where's the next event? Do you have it set yet?
I do not. It will probably be next March. That's what I'm thinking about. And I'm having some conversations with people. I'm trying to get, somebody to get excited about it and help me build it. So I got somebody in Atlanta. I got somebody in Cincinnati. A couple other places I'm thinking about. If you have a suggestion, I'm all ears, Kurt.
Hey, let's ask our audience who wants to host the next 21 Hats event. Let's go. Hey, I want to ask another story about the Inc. days, and that is around Norm Brodsky. Many people might know him as a contributor to Inc. magazine. They also might know his business dealings. Can you tell us a little bit about the story that you and I shared prior to our discussion about Norm and really how some of that was a foundation for 21 Hats?
Sure. And I should tell you, I have a business degree. I had worked as a business journalist. I knew nothing about entrepreneurship when I went to Inc. magazine. I was hired there by an editor who had just taken over. He was something of a friend. And I had some experience kind of rethinking and redesigning magazines. And he brought me in as one of the top editors to help him figure out what he had and what he should do with the magazine. And I thought I would be there for a year or two and then move on. But I fell in love with the people I met at the magazine, and that includes Bo and Norm. And I fell in love with the people we were covering and the whole thing. And that is what led to, obviously, to 21 Hats. But I learned so much from Bo and from Norm. Norm was the best read thing in the magazine. He was a columnist. He'd been doing it for years. It was that kind of, I think it was called Street Smarts. And that's exactly what it was. It was this street smart education in running a business that was made from his lessons, his stories, his mistakes, as told by Bo, who was kind of his ghostwriter. And I became their editor and worked with them and, just ate it up because I was learning something new all the time. One of my favorite, he wrote so many good columns, and I'm really proud of having played any role in that. But one in particular, we were having lunch, the three of us, and Norm just mentioned that he'd got in, I don't know what it was. He probably got a phone call from somebody saying, listen, we've been following your business. It was a box storage business and a document destruction business that at that point he'd probably had for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. He had managed to 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 buy land in Brooklyn that was right on the East River at a time when the land was worth nothing. And by this point, the land was worth a lot of money. And that was part of the reason he wound up getting a lot of money for his business. But he'd been building this business for a long time. He gets this phone call that somebody's interested in buying it. He tells him, "No, I'm not interested." And he mentions that to us over lunch. And I just said, "Oh, come on, Norm. You got to meet with them. Call them back. Tell them you'll at least take a meeting. Because if nothing else, you're going to get a great column out of this." And of course, that was what was most important to me. So Norm, being the good sport that he is, agreed to do that. And one thing led to another, and they wound up in serious discussions about the purchase of the business. This played out over close to a year. And he started writing about it on a monthly basis. That became his column every month for, I think, like 10 or 11 months, in which he wrote about every twist and turn of these negotiations, which ended up with them shaking hands on a deal and going to settlement. At which point, the other side tried to pull a fast one on them, and they tried to drop the price at the last minute, which, I think that this was a PE firm. This is a common strategy. You get somebody excited about selling the business. They're thinking about where they're going to spend all the money they're going to make. And at the last minute, cut 10%, 20% off the price, and they're too committed to the deal to walk away. They didn't know who they were dealing with. Norm had no interest in that. He immediately stood up and walked out. That was the end of the deal. And he wrote about that. One of the cool things, a lot of people thought he was nuts sharing all this, and the other side, it kind of became a running joke because they would say to him as they were meeting and negotiating, "Norm, you're not going to put this in the magazine, are you?" And of course, he put it in the magazine, and he wrote about it when they walked away from the deal. And then he got a phone call from somebody else, and he wound up selling the company for over $100 million. And it all came out of that, initial phone call. But for me, the lesson was what you could do in an ongoing basis that, most people wouldn't have done what Norm did. And Norm never would have done it if he had known that he was going to end up being serious about it. But to his credit, once he got into it, he stuck with writing about it, and he wrote about it all the way through. That was kind of the inspiration for the podcast that I do. As you said, I have 10 regulars. It's kind of a peer group conversation. And instead of just talking to people about how great things have gone and, distant memories of when they might have struggled years or decades ago, it's what's going on right now. The glory, and all too often the gory.
Hey, Loren, let's pause there for just 1 second, because I want to reiterate something you just said. And first of all, what you did, or what Norm did, and you did with the magazine, was people were allowed into the scene, and they saw themselves, their own stories in it. And as a result, it allowed them to probably manage their business or run their business better, because they realized they weren't alone. They also saw how Norm handled it, or how other people handle things. And they just get to see almost like a reality TV show at times. If you're just joining us on Unlocking Moves, today's episode is brought to you as usual by Hire Better, the strategic talent partner for growth-minded entrepreneurs everywhere. Now, flipping gears to what you're doing with 21 Hats, you said 10 business owners. I just want to highlight what you're about to say, what you just said. 10 business owners. He has followed the ins and outs and divorces and breakups and business gone bad and business has gone well over at least the last 3.5 years. So with that as a backdrop, tell us more.
Well, let me give you an example. One of the people who's a regular, is a guy named Paul Downs, who Kurt, you met in Fort Worth. Paul has a business outside of Philadelphia. He makes custom conference tables. I first got to know Paul when I was at the New York Times, and he just sent me a cold email saying, I've been reading the blog that you've been editing. It's pretty good. I think you're missing one thing. This was 2009. You may remember the economy wasn't doing so great back then. And Paul wrote to me and said, you should have somebody, a business owner, contributing what it's like to be running a business that's going through bankruptcy, which is where he thought he was headed. And you can imagine, as an editor, you don't get a lot of offers from people volunteering to take you through the bankruptcy process of the thing they've spent the last 20, 30 years building and the heartbreak that ensues. So, of course, I met with Paul and I signed him up, and he started writing. It turned out he's a terrific writer. And I think, in his case, it was a little bit similar to Norm in that it wasn't he wasn't just building the business, he was ending the business. So he felt emboldened, I think, to share everything. There was no ego involved. He knew it was going to fail. So why not just share it? And maybe it helps somebody else either avoid going through that, or if if they too have to go through it, maybe they learn something from the process. And by the way, that's one thing I've learned along the way. Entrepreneurs are the most generous people. Try talking to a politician or an athlete about the mistakes they've made. It's not going to work. Trust me. But entrepreneurs will share it in the hope that even competitors may learn from the mistakes they've made. By and large, they're okay with that. Paul was the perfect example. The best thing about it was he turned the business around. It didn't end up going into bankruptcy, and he actually credits writing for the New York Times with helping him, because he started thinking about things differently. He actually thinks he became a better business owner, because he was thinking, I may have to defend this decision in the New York Times. Let me give this a little bit more thought before I make this decision. He turned it around, but he kept doing what he'd been doing. He kept telling us to the penny how much money he was taking out of the business, how much when the business turned profitable. He announced that in a blog post in the Times, and he joined me on the blog where he continues to do the same thing. Last year he told us we got off to a bad start. He had to stop taking a salary. He's told us when things have gone really well. He tells us about, he went through a whole hiring a new company to do a brand new marketing campaign for him. He took us through the ins and outs of that experience. So he's just been great at sharing, and it's exactly, what you said.
That's awesome. And I know you've done that with multiple business owners on your podcast, and it's riveting TV, so to speak, and it's great. You're doing great work. All right, so Loren, now I want to give a brief commercial for what you're doing with your newsletter, because it's great content, as I said before. And I just want to read maybe the last 5 or 6 newsletter titles, just to give our listeners an idea of the type of stuff that you cover. So today, the article was New Rules on Overtime, Non-Competes, Cookies, and TikTok. So as I said before, that news about non-compete is huge, and a lot of folks are really struggling with what to do. Loren does a great job of breaking it down, giving you some research from the thought leaders as well as his own perspective. One that came out yesterday was entitled, "You Need to Accept That You're the Boss." That's so important for so many entrepreneurs to know. The next one, Chipotle has raised prices 6 times in 3 years. Some advice on raising prices. For family businesses, the other day it was called Make Family Members Earn It. Another one, how 7 startups are using AI. Getting started in government contracting, the art of building a real estate boutique, creating KPIs for your business. Guys, that is great stuff that you're getting in a daily newsletter from 21 Hats. So I can't give you enough props there, Loren. So thanks for what you're doing.
I really appreciate that. The idea is, some of that is my content that I create. Some of it is aggregation. I'm finding what I think are the most important stories of the day, specifically or for business owners. And I try to put them in one place so that you can just click on one email in your inbox and get the most important stories of the day just for business owners.
Well, it's great work. Keep up the great work.
Thank you.
I want to shift gears. I want to ask you, You're familiar with the best-selling book, Who's Your Mike, that came out about a year and a half ago.
I did a podcast with the author of that book. Did you know that?
Well, you're a lucky man. You're a lucky man for having that opportunity. As I understand it, you're also quoted in said book. So here's what I want to ask you. So I know you know it's a story of, or every chapter is a different character, a different archetype about the types of employees you're going to meet on your entrepreneurial journey. I'd love to hear from you. Who is your favorite or most interesting character?
They all resonated with me, honestly, Kurt. It's a terrific book. But Mike was the one that that really hit home, in part because of personal experiences I've had, but more just because I have heard a version of that story so often from other entrepreneurs. And it's I mean, there are a lot of things that entrepreneurs and business owners struggle with. There are a lot of things that are hard to do, but there's nothing harder than telling somebody who has been a loyal employee, who has worked really hard, who's been there with you from the beginning, telling them that, you know what, you may not have you may not be growing with this job. We may have to figure something else out. That is just such a hard conversation, and there's just no way around it. So that's the one that really resonated with me.
It's funny. I start many of my speeches about Who's Your Mike with something along the lines of: Imagine your best friend in high school. You guys were thick as thieves. You traveled together. Went to parties together. You tried to pick up girls together. Whatever. Now tell him you have to fire him, and that's often the case with your Mike. You don't have to fire Mike. Mike not necessarily a bad guy, but some great human interest and human emotions in there.
I had that experience at actually you mentioned I was the editor of Philadelphia Magazine. Before I was the editor, I was the number two editor, and there was a guy there whose name, I kid you not, was Mike. And he had had a really good career there. He had helped me in all kinds of ways, a really good guy. And he just I don't know what something went wrong, and he was not doing a good job. And it was the first time I was close to a firing, and I just learned so much from that. I'm happy to say that that one wasn't my call. I was the number two editor, but I watched the number one editor go through the process, and it was so hard because they had been close as well. And this guy, he was probably in his early 40s. I think he had four kids. It was just so painful, but it was one of those situations where at the end he kind of fired himself. But I just watching the way that played out, it was a real learning experience for me. And again, that just all came back to me when I read your book.
Well, I appreciate that, and oftentimes that does happen where people see themselves going down the wrong path as you're finally becoming clear to you that Mike is the wrong guy, and they often self-select out. So it's not too surprising that that happened. Hey, my next question is around the topic of the show called Unlocking Move. And as you know, it's a couple key pivotal moments, decision points that change the trajectory of your career or your life. My goal is to help inspire others, entrepreneurs, people to spot those opportunities and seize them when they get them. What's perhaps an unlocking move or two for you?
Um, one thing that really sticks out in my mind goes back to my early days at Inc. when I was still figuring out what entrepreneurship was about and what the role of the magazine really was. And I have a really specific memory of a focus group conversation that we did. I'm pretty sure it was in Tucson. It was probably about 20 years ago, a little bit more. And there were a handful of editors at Inc. Sitting at a table with probably 10 or 15 business owners. And we were basically asking them, what are you getting out of the magazine? What are you looking to from us? What can we provide of real value to you? And one of the first owners to speak up, just with the honesty that you got to love, just very candidly said, well, let me tell you what I don't want. I don't want to be told how to run my business by a 24-year-old reporter working for a money-losing publication. And that kind of knocked us all on our heels. But I have taken that to heart ever since. And I think what he was saying was, you know, you can't assign a reporter and think that the reporter knows enough to tell actual business owners how to run their business. What we really want is insight into the experiences of business owners. You've got to work harder and give it to us straight from the horse's mouth. Don't give me the translated version from a 24-year-old kid. And I took that to heart. I tried to remember that in every story I ever edited. And that was in many ways the genesis of the podcast, straight from the horse's mouth.
Wow. A career of quality generated from some comments back in the day. I love that, and I think it does change, or it does show in the work that you do, that the quality is there from a seasoned veteran as opposed to a 24-year-old novice. That's for sure. So it's funny, if you replace 24-year-old journalist with 24-year-old MBA student and exchange a magazine for private equity firm, that's how a lot of people feel.
That's a great point. I love that.
That's awesome. Okay. So now I've got a question for you. I consider myself the listener's advocate. And if I've got Loren Feldman here on a one-on-one opportunity at a dinner party or whatever, what would I want to ask them? I had a couple of easy layups that I was thinking of, which is maybe some of the best business advice you've gotten, which you feel free to share. But I want to ask you, in this day and age, what is the best way for me to get my business some great PR and some good media coverage from the big magazines? Or is it still available?
It gets harder and harder, in part because there are fewer publications, and those publications are, and by and large, are not doing great. The good news is that there are a lot more voices out there. We're talking on your podcast. There are a lot of other great podcasts. I hate to admit it. I'd like to think it was just you and me, but there are other people who do this too. And there are other small publications. So I think one lesson that was probably always true, but is especially true now, is that there's no opportunity that's too small. If somebody expresses an interest in sharing your story, you should probably take them up on it, regardless of what the publication is. And because you have to think long term, that whoever is interested in you may go on to a bigger publication and present you with a bigger opportunity. So that's part of it. The other thing I think that a lot of people miss is you need to be able to tell your story well. And it's remarkable how many business owners struggle with that. And I think what you need to do is practice it. You need to describe your business to civilians, people who aren't really familiar with what you do, and see what they respond to. Get better at telling that story. Because a lot of business owners, I think, they're not sure what someone else would find interesting. And I found this through the years. Somebody will pitch me on a story, and I won't really be that interested, but they sound like an interesting person, so I'll start having a conversation with them. And within 10 minutes, I realize, whoa, wait a second. There are these 12 other things that are really interesting that'll really make for a story. So it's important to figure out what you actually have accomplished, what you know that would be of interest to someone else, and then look for opportunities to share that. Does that help?
It's funny. I asked you for PR and getting in publications, and you answered some great business advice, because what you just answered is not just a pitch for a magazine, but it's also a pitch for your business. And the number of people who don't have a quality 30 to 60-second pitch for what they do, and they stumble and ah, well, let me get back with you. Just tell me what you freaking do. And that's everyone should have that pitch nailed down. So good stuff. Okay, I've got one more hard question for you, and that is, what is one question that no one ever asks you, and either you're really glad they don't, or you wish they would ask you?
You know what? I guess no one's ever asked me about my baseball experience in the Dominican Republic, so you've already kind of covered that one. There's no question that I wish they wouldn't ask me, because I've made a career out of trying to ask people tough questions. So I decided a long time ago, if anybody asks me a tough question, I have an obligation to answer it. Um, I mean, I guess I don't look for opportunities to tell people why I've been fired several times, and also laid off. So I guess that's a question that I don't go out of my way to
Well,
bring
let's
up.
go. Why were you fired? Who were you caught with, and what were you smoking?
Um, I I guess my first firing was with Philadelphia Magazine, and there I looked at it as kind of like being the manager of a baseball team. The magazine was owned by a father. It's a family business, like an 80-year-old father, a 40-year-old son, and they were both running the business together, but kind of pulling in different directions. So that the 80-year-old was kind of 80 years old and cranky and wanted to still be in charge. And the 40-year-old was 40 and cranky and wanted to take over. And they would pull you in different directions, but not acknowledge that when the three of you were in the same room together. And it put you in the position of, well, why do I don't want to throw either of you under the bus because that's not going to work out for me. How do I explain why I did what I did? It was very challenging. I wasn't the first one. They had fired the previous editors after 2 or 3 years. I knew I was going to have 2 or 3 years tops. So I like being a manager of a baseball team. It's just a question of when. I knew that. And that's what happened. It was unfortunate because I loved being editor of Philadelphia Magazine. It's a really good publication, and I love being in a regional publication. There's something about being able to walk down the street and run into people who appear in the magazine, who read the magazine. You could really be part of the community. And that's hard to do with a national publication. It's kind of what I've tried to recreate with 21 Hats by building this small community where we get together in person and I can get that same kind of feedback. But it was difficult getting fired. It was a job I loved. I did not want to be fired.
Well, I appreciate you answering the question and played along, Loren. Thank you very much. Hey, on that note, we're going to wrap this puppy up. Loren, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to ask my audience to please go like and subscribe and give a 5-star review to Unlocking Moves wherever you consume your podcasts, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and do the same for 21 Hats. It's a great podcast. Go check it out from Loren Feldman. Loren, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Kurt. Always a pleasure. I've learned so much from you. I really appreciate the support that you've given me through the years.
Let's go. If you're an entrepreneur and you think you might have outgrown a member of your team, or maybe you've got a mic, as we talked about in Who's Your Mic, check out this quiz at who'syourmic.com/quiz. That's who'syourmic.com/quiz.